Jarret Marcel,
Hmm.
a singer, songwriter, composer,
Hmm.
producer.
Self-proclaimed madman.
Nice. But are you a singer songwriter first, do you think?
I think I'm probably a composer first. I wrote melodies and music before I ever did any singing. And I think for the longest time I didn't have confidence in singing. But I noticed that whenever I would perform, let's say like in group or band settings, I would have people come up afterwards and say, you should sing more. So it's kind of disconcerting, when you've done a show, let's say in a band setting, and then afterwards people are telling you that maybe you should be the lead singer or you should have more songs that highlight you singing. So, I got feedback from that, and I was like, well, people kept telling me I had a good voice. I'd always do harmonies because I've always been able to do harmonies, no problem. And so then I was like, okay, I'll try doing it on my own. So that
Cool.
was kind of nerve-wracking.
Your latest disc, Winterlocken, is that
Hmm.
how you pronounce that?
Hmm.
A lot of layers. We talked about this earlier. Some Lord of the Rings references and
Right,
some
right.
deep influences from classical composers.
Hmm.
Where where did all this come from? What were your earliest influences as a kid that would have led you to this point of making this kind of music?
Well, my mother loved classical music. She was a big Beethoven fan. And she would love to clean the house while listening to Beethoven. And she literally put Beethoven on, just cranking it up where the speakers, about to break. Which I must say that classical music sounds best loud. So if you're in a car with someone and they have it turned on very soft, you're not experiencing it. You've got to crank it up to where it hurts the speakers a little bit. And then classical music rocks at that point. And my father, of course, was into Tom T. Hall, Hank Williams Jr., and all that kind of stuff. So that's where the two sort of came together.
Well, and that's I'm surprised about the country part a little bit because uh, your songs lyrically are quite complex, and I mean, not that all those people you
Hmm.
mentioned have simplistic lyrics necessarily, but
Hmm.
the storytelling elements of your lyrics seem to come from somewhere else. Are there
Hmm.
other writers that influence your lyric writing, do you think?
Um, well, I liked reading a lot of fantasy novels. Um, so I suppose maybe, um, that element of lyric writing came from there. I've always liked artists that put time into the lyrics. I always like lyric writing, let's say from someone like John Lennon, or also, oh my God, I can't think of his name right now. Um, Tom Waits. Have you heard of Tom Waits? Very good lyricist. So I like interesting lyrics.
Well, yeah, and then Tom Waits, great storyteller, and
And great storyteller.
John Lennon, perhaps a great pop storyteller.
Yes, he's kind of on that cusp, sort of obviously thinking about his lyrics, but still managing to pull in that pop flavor a little bit, which I think is probably a very difficult balancing act to pull off.
Well, yeah, and your songs are layered and deep, and they're fairly long. I mean, I
Hmm.
haven't actually looked at the time on all of them, but they're probably hovering in the 5 minute range. I don't know, or 6 minutes maybe.
Yeah, I
Are they?
do. I do a lot of that.
Um,
Yeah, definitely not radio friendly.
well, so when you're writing a song, does that come into play? Like, this is getting long, or
Absolutely not. I like to tell everybody that when I'm creating, it's totally self-indulgent. If the song needs to be 3 minutes long, I will just let it be 3 minutes long. Um, if the song doesn't feel finished, if it's done at 6 minutes, it's done at 8 minutes, 9 minutes. In a very weird sense, once I start composing a song, it kind of becomes this monster of its own. And I literally feel pulled in a certain direction with the song. And I always know when it's done, and if it wants to pull me towards long, to a length, that's where I will go. And I won't stop till it's done.
well, how? And you say you always know when it's done.
Hmm.
I hear this from so many artists. Doesn't matter the medium, they don't always know when it's done.
Hmm.
I mean, what are the indicators to you, or is there, or do you just know?
I just know. It's weird. I think this might be a very bizarre analogy, but it's like cooking. It's like you're working on a meal, and you stop the eggs before they start to smoke. So I sort of have a sense for when that's happening. That's not to say that I don't cross over the line sometimes, but I'm very aware of when I've crossed over the line. I'll go, oh yeah, that's finished. Take out that vocal, take out that guitar. It's too much. There's a certain point where the song starts losing its synergy, where maybe it becomes too heavy. There's too much going on, and it just starts to flop. So I usually know when I'm up at that line, and then I just pull back a little bit.
And it took you 3 years, you mentioned, to finish this latest CD. And you're like a lot of people these days who, you're mastering all the controls, you're engineering it, you're playing all the instruments. I mean, not many people do that, but you're recording it yourself. Does it concern you, maybe a lack of objectivity? And you mentioned possibly getting other ears involved in your next project.
Definitely.
What's your advice to other people who are going down that road of doing everything themselves?
Well, first of all, they're in for one hell of a crazy ride. And objectivity is very difficult at that point. Or you're sitting at home with your computer and a microphone, and you can layer 20 guitar parts, 40 guitar parts. You can keep going. And I think sometimes there's a temptation that if you put one more thing, the song will be better. One more thing, the song will be better. I do believe in an old rule, and I think it might have been, since we were talking about the Beatles, Paul McCartney earlier, George Martin, their producer, had a philosophy that if the song sounded good, let's say when one of the guys walked in, if the song sounded good with just a vocal and acoustic guitar, then you already had a good song. But if the song didn't sound good right from the get-go, then no amount of crap that you can put on top of it is going to make it good at that point. So if you're starting from the standpoint of you have a really good track in the first place, you put your icing on it, and then you just have to have the wisdom of knowing that when to stop.
And that process for you, does it begin generally with a guitar and a lyric, or a thought?
Usually it begins with me driving in my car. And I'll be driving down the road, and I have a rhythm. I get rhythms stuck in my head. That one track on Midnight in Sri Lanka, that track started off with the drum track in my head. I just kept hearing that over and over again. And it has a little bit of a Bonham kind of flavor, but it's not. And for a while I thought I was humming one of his drum tracks, and I realized I wasn't, but that track got stuck in my head. And then from there, it just kind of built backwards. I actually write a lot of songs by humming rhythms. And I'll pull out my cell phone real quick and put it in record mode and sit it there and drive, and I'll just be humming out the stuff. Like, you never want to see any of those videos. They're really, really goofy. But I've probably got like hundreds of them.
Well, you were born in France, you said, and raised until you were 12 in France and Germany on an army base, military base. And what's your feeling, and then lived in Virginia, you said, and you've been here now for 10 years or so. What's your feeling about music in specifically in Houston versus, say, the rest of the United States, but also, against what people, your average person, would hear in Europe?
I think there's more of a willingness to take in something different, I would say, in Europe than what you would get over here. For whatever reason, and we could get into the the politics or the philosophy of what's going on in the music business over here. But I think basically what happens is over here, I think people are sort of being programmed as to what to like. It's a lot more convenient if you can tell the customer what they like, so when they go to the store, they're going to buy what you want them to like. And I think our entertainment industry, I think our music stations are all controlled that way, basically telling the audience, this is what you like, come here and buy this and we'll supply you with what we've told you should like. So not to get too deep into that, but the example I mentioned earlier, that in Europe you could turn a radio station on and you might hear maybe, let's say, a big band, you might hear something from Duke Ellington, let's say, something from way back when, and next thing you know, you're listening to some punk rock, from the 70s. And the next moment you might be listening to Amy Winehouse, and then, or maybe a group I like, oh, I can't, right out of my brain right now, too far in my references. But anyway, the whole idea is you can hear things from different, decades all within a matter of 20, 30 minutes.
You made another an interesting analogy to sort of you get out of it what you put into it when you mentioned about like going into a museum and taking the time to absorb the art, whatever it is. Explain that again.
Yeah, I think, and this is one of my attitudes about art, to really experience art, I don't think you can be passive. In other words, if you go to a museum and there's a lot of great artwork on the wall, you can't enjoy it by just walking through the room. You've got to go up to the artwork, you've got to engage it, you've got to look at the brush strokes, you've got to look at the colors being used, you got to look at the subject matter that the artist has picked. And it's the same thing with music. When you're listening to music that is, let's say, thoughtful, where the artist has really put something into it, it requires that you actually sit down and listen to it. A lot of music, and I mean that kind of loosely, that's out on the airways is what I call just a passive experience. In other words, the listener just turns the volume up really loud and the beat hits them and they don't have to do anything else. Oh, I can feel the beat. Done. You're not really experiencing anything when that happens, I can go up to someone and pop them upside the head, and that's basically all that's doing. And they feel the fact that they've been popped upside the head, but what have they really experienced other than me, like maybe hurting them?
Right. Well, so it would be good for people then to not be passive with their music and with listening to music and trying to engage more. How would you tell someone how do they do that? How do you tell people how to listen, say, to music?
Well, start with something that is probably going to be difficult for most people. Pick out several tracks, maybe from one artist, so that way you can get a flavor for that artist. Turn off your cell phone, turn off your TV, lock your door, put yourself in your living room, put on that music, and lie down and be still.
Nice. Well, good advice. Well, thank you so much for doing the interview and being here. Would you play a song?
Sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks.
Thanks. Hard Reward from Winterlaken. Save the world, we must be brave, face our fears when reason fails. A brother's hate mixed with our pain obscures the truth and no one gains. Can't stand tall when we all crawl, close our hearts to a sister's call. The toughest